Hi, everybody.
Hey. Welcome back to the downlore.
I'm Natalie.
I'm Claudia.
And we are here today again on God's internet, and we are going to talk about some favorites this time.
Yeah,
last episode we had some hateritis.
Mm-hmm. Now we're going to do our top 5 books of all time. So we're really going from one end of the spectrum to the other. We're going from books we think flopped to like the cream of the crop.
Exactly. Our greatest hits, if you will.
Yeah.
I guess we can alternate one after the other.
Yeah.
But
1, 2, 2, etc.
Yeah, and we'll try not to give spoilers for any of these books because I think we'll just give like a quick rundown of what we loved about it,
so
rather than actually a full-blown plot summary. But I'm so excited.
Yeah,
I love these books with my entire heart, and I know you feel the same.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very excited to talk about it, and hopefully you get some recommendations out of it, because I don't know if some of these books have definitely made an appearance on Book Talk and BookTube, but I don't know if all of them necessarily have, or have been talked about at great length. So
right.
Yeah,
there's some names you'll recognize for sure, some that you might have seen but haven't read, and maybe because you're scared of how long they are. I'm talking about this big brick of a book that's right in front of us, and maybe some that you've never heard of and are going to take a look and see if it kind of floats your boat.
Hell yeah.
All right, so Natalie, do you want to give us do you want to start with number 5 or do you want to start with number 1? Should we work our way up to the top?
Let's work our way up to the top. I will start with my number 5. Which honestly, it's embarrassing that I had to put this at number 5, because this author is like the paragon of the literary industry, and it's Toni Morrison. Obviously, I think one of the greatest writers ever to live. My favorite Toni Morrison book is Sula, which is, I don't think, a deep cut by any means, but it's not her most popular book, which is The Bluest Eye. I think that's the one that most everyone has heard of. Bluest Eye, Beloved.
Yeah.
Those are the top 2 most talked about, I think. But and Sula,
honestly, because we had
to read them
at
in
school.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I actually had to read Sula in school, but it was one of the most memorable and one of my most favorite academic reads, and I've read it multiple times since I had to read it sophomore year of high school. I just think exemplifies Toni Morrison's best storytelling and her ability to really juxtapose good and evil and what that really means in society, especially in terms of gender and race. There's so much back and forth in this book with scapegoating and antagonization of things just because they go against the grain of what society has determined is normal or good. And it's really just a devastating, very unsettling story about Black female friendship, conventionality, racism, of course, very common Toni Morrison book theme, and classism as well. And basically, just to give like overarching synopsis, it's about these 2 girls, Nell and Sula, who live in on this hill called the Bottom, ironically enough, and they called it that because the soil was bad or something, and the white people who owned the land wanted to kind of segregate the Black people to this worse area, and they sold it to them as, because it's on a hill, it's closer to God. And so they bought into that, and they're living in the Bottom, and it's kind of ghetto-y and slummy. And then all of a sudden they decide they want to build a golf course on the Bottom,
as one does.
Yep. But that's not really the focal point of the story. It's more about Nell and Sula, or I'm sorry, I think I mixed that up. They were down below before, and they wanted to build a golf course there, so they sent them up on the hill and displaced them. But Nell and Sula are like, it starts when they're in their children, and they're playing with this little boy, and he ends up drowning in a river because Sula like pushed him too hard. And so they're like both in on this like accidental murder together, and they like have this crazy trauma bond over it. It's wild. And long story short, just like kind of follows them growing up and how their relationships change, and Sula kind of becomes the black sheep of this town. She ends up leaving for a long duration of time and having lots of relationships with different men, just gallivanting around, and because she thinks that it's boring in the bottom and everyone has their same kind of monotonous lifestyle. And then eventually returns, and everyone kind of like scapegoats her as being evil because she doesn't fit into the conventional thing that women are supposed to be, which is like submissive to their husband and staying at home, and she's like gone off and done her own little thing. And her and Nell like drift apart. Sula ultimately dies. It's a whole thing. There's lots of stuff going on.
Wow. And it's not a long book either.
No, it's very short, but it's very moving, and I think it's one of Toni Morrison's like best paced, most captivating books. I just found myself really invested in the story, and I loved the focus on Sula as the main character who we are expected to empathize with, and we do see as not a bad person, where that is the opposite of what everyone else around her is thinking about her. And it's just it's similar to The Bluest Eye, and like the main character has a little bit of Delulu, and they don't really know necessarily that that's how everyone else is feeling about them.
Interesting.
And that everyone else is seeing them in a different way than they're seeing themselves. It's just, Toni Morrison's very good at playing with perspective and vantage point on morality and just characters in general. And I really love it. And it's my favorite Toni Morrison, and I'm ashamed to say that I had to put it at number 5 because there's other books that haunt me and stick with me more. But I love it.
Incredibly intellectual number 5.
I love Toni Morrison so much. I just respect her craft. She was so gifted, and we are blessed to have lived on the earth that Toni Morrison put books into.
Yeah. All right, so my top 5, or my number 5 on my list, is also one that I read kind of a while ago. I was like, most of these are more recent reads, if we're being completely honest. But for number 5, I was like, I just needed to pull from something a little bit earlier. This is not academic or really all that intellectual at all. However, it started like a big obsession for me, which was Agatha Christie when I read Murder on the Orient Express, and it has just stuck with me for a really, really, really long time since I read it. And so I figured if I'm still thinking about it now, like it's going on the list. There's just something that's like in a different sense, like a different type of intellectual sense about like stringing together a murder mystery novel and like all the reveals that have to, come to light. And Murder on the Orient Express is so bizarrely exquisite. And this is going to be a spoiler, but there's a movie and the book has been out for ages. So if you don't know, I'm sorry. Everybody's actually in on it. Like everyone in the train car is the killer. And it's just Poirot, the main detective, has such a unique personality, such a distinct, like just way of acting that really like sets him apart from everybody he ever comes into contact with. And it's like peculiar and bizarre and like oddly charming. And his just like watching someone's brain work that way is so fun because you vicariously feel like you're figuring things out, even if you don't see things coming, and it just makes you feel good about reading it. And
I love characters like that.
Yeah, he's just like this brilliant little Belgian detective who says funny things and has a mustache and like dresses super proper.
Of course.
And so you're like in love with the characters while he's doing his job and while, all this is happening. And once I finished reading Murder on the Orient Express, I then basically read like just Agatha Christie for months, which is, a sign of a good book. It gets you to read more.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that was Murder on the Orient Express for me at number 5. All right, Natalie, give us number 4.
Okay, coming in at number 4, we have a major departure from my last
Love that.
my last book. Number 4 is going to be House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and I'm very excited to say there is a sequel coming out
Ooh,
in September.
nice.
So I'm very, 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 very excited to read that. Although like this would perfectly have worked as a standalone. I did not even know there was a sequel coming out until recently when I was looking at it on Goodreads. It works perfectly well by itself, so don't feel like you're investing into some crazy series if you pick this up. But it is, I wrote down just 4 descriptive words about it, and I think they perfectly
Please read them to
capture
us.
the essence of this book.
In all caps.
In
mind
all
you.
caps, hilarious, heartwarming, gay, and perfect. This book is, I'm gonna try not to spoil anything. This book is about a man who works as basically like an orphanage reviewer. So he goes to orphanages and determines whether or not they are allowed to stay open, like whether
like
or not
an
they need
inspector.
funding. Yeah, he's like an inspector, or like an auditor,
Got
like an
it.
orphan auditor, and he works for this bureau of magical orphanage auditing. Okay, so all of these orphanages that he goes to have magical children. There's magic in this world. But he's just like a frumpy 40-year-old guy who has a really grumpy cat and
Of course he does.
lives a very normal, boring life, and he's been doing this job forever and he's never gotten promoted. Like he's just like in a slump, you know? He's the personification of a slump.
Yeah.
And he gets sent to go to this one particular orphanage, and they decide to send him there because he doesn't really like have empathy. He will be very honest in his reviews of these places. So he goes to this orphanage that they decide they can't really send anyone else to because they might have skewed perception of the children living there. And this orphanage is on this island, and it's in this house overlooking the Cerulean Sea, as you might guess.
Wonderful.
And there are like 5 or 6 children that live there. They're all very magical, and one of them is the Antichrist. And he's 6 years old.
It's unserious.
These children are fucking adorable. They're so charming and cute and funny. And the orphanage director...
Antichrist, I can't.
I know. The orphanage director is this guy named Arthur, and it's also kind of a romance between Arthur and this orphanage auditor
The
man.
inspector man. Ooh.
So it's very cute. Clearly the orphanage bureau wants to shut this place down, and it's kind of like his moral battle between developing feelings for Arthur and the children and like doing his job of whether or not this place can keep operating. And yeah, I think it's gorgeous. It's so heartwarming and sweet, and it's definitely an allegory for things that happen in the real world where it's either like refugee children, there's, you know, racism, xenophobia energy in it for sure. But I really loved it. I'm excited to see what happens in the next book because the romance like concluded in the first book. So I'm curious to see what's coming. But I am so excited to rejoin this little world because it felt like a hug reading this book.
Cute.
It was so great. I loved it.
Love that. Okay. My number 4 is also a departure from my number 5. So my number 4 is A Secret History by Donna Tartt. And I'm just going to say, if you've read The Secret History, I finished it and I was like, this is How to Get Away with Murder. If you've watched the show, the like, you know, the murder at the beginning, like hiding a murder, like friends coalescing around, like trying to hide a murder, like that is The Secret History. Like convinced Shonda read this. Shonda was like, that's going to be a really good show. But instead, like hers is obviously like law school students and all that. Much more dramatic. This one is set in a liberal arts college with undergrads in this like very, very niche, very, very niche like ancient Greek program. Like they're all like essentially like Greek majors, but like it's like a 6-kid class.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's very hard to get into. And the main character that you follow in first person POV, his name is Richard. He tries to get into it, and they like are like, no, you can't apply to that. Like it's a very selective group, and he's like persistent, and they end up letting him in. And he's kind of like the odd kid out because these, I've actually forget how many of them there are at the beginning. I think it's just 5. They all have a secret, and they can't let him in on the secret because it's a deadly secret. So he has no idea why. They're so kind of like bizarre and standoffish. Like they interact with him at first, but like they just seem like they have so much. It's like they seem secretive. He's like, what the fuck's going on? Anyway, long story short, it's written from this like first person college boy's perspective, and you can just tell from the writing that he's like the most unreliable of narrators because he's an idiot, he's naive, he's like drunk half the time. And it's just, it follows as these kids like try to cover something up and then have to lie to cover a lie to cover a lie to cover a lie, and it just gets more and more drastic. They get more and more paranoid, and then at the very, very end, like what Henry does at the end, I'm not going to spoil it, but like Henry is the most charismatic of all of them in like this weird kind of like intellectual broody way. And he's the one where you really start to notice how if someone of his level of charisma encourages you to do something, like peer pressure is real, you know? Like this entire friend group would bend for Henry in a way that they wouldn't really bend for each other. And like they're all kind of under his influence, and they look at him as like an authority. He's also a college boy. He doesn't really know, but he's really, really smart, and he's like the teacher's favorite, obviously, and whatever. So it's a whole thing on like how when you fall down this like rabbit hole of lies, and you're led by someone who you like want to be friends with, because Richard is like kind of desperate to like be friends with all of them and like get let into the group. Like no, he did not want to be in that group. Like in retrospect, that was weird fucked up shit. And by the time you get to the end, you're like, oh my. It's insane. The ending, like the last 50 pages, just like, it's not a fantasy novel or anything. It's not like there's any weird magical twists, but at the very end, like the way that you're just kind of like shocked by the ending, insane. Yeah, and the prose is just, I think it was written back in like the 90s, something like that. Like it's not new by any means. And the prose is it's on the denser side for a fiction novel, but because it's written as a college boy's perspective, it's still so wonderful to like be in like a head that you know is unreliable.
That's so fun. I've heard only great things about The Secret History, and it's been on my TBR for a long time, but as Claudia and I were commiserating the other day, like the TBRs are endless. I just reorganized mine into like standalones, complete series, and incomplete series. I'm trying to deprioritize the incomplete series.
Because that shit's painful.
Like, I read the first 3 Red Rising books, and I had to stop myself because there's a perspective and generation switch at book 4, and book 7 isn't out yet. Yeah. And so I'm like, I have to wait until we're closer to book 7, because if I blow through books 4 through 6 and then I don't know what the finale is, I'm gonna be upset.
It's gonna suck.
So I'm gonna wait.
Look, our silly little mental health can only handle so many cliffhangers.
It's fragile, you guys.
There's only room for so many cliffhangers, and I mean the Iron Flame cliffhanger is hurting me right now.
And I honestly have series fatigue after Throne of Glass. Like, that was too long.
That was so long.
I battled my way through, and it was great, obviously, but I just need to be on a standalone wave right now, I think.
And we love a self-aware queen. We love that for you.
Look, I just read Daughter of No Worlds and DNF'd the series because I couldn't continue. Like, as much as I enjoyed the first book, couldn't bring myself to read the next 2.
And it will forever just be a standalone for you.
It's a standalone to me, and that's fine.
All right, beautiful. In spot number 3.
In spot number 3, ironically, so the author describes that these books should and can be read as standalones, but there is a world built in these books that she has drawn from for other books. So this book now has a prequel, but you don't need to read the prequel to understand what's going on in this book, and vice versa. Yeah. It's all very contained. And there's also another prequel that's the prequel that's coming down the line.
The pre-prequel.
And that is a book I've talked about several times before. The Priory of the Orange Tree, number 3. It is, I think, the most perfect masterclass of fantasy world building that I have ever read. And if you've never read anything that Samantha Shannon has written, do yourself a favor and like be brave and pick up the brick, because it is worth every page and minute that you spend reading it. This book is just pure flat out genius.
And it's detailed.
It is so
well paced,
so intricate, and so well paced. There is everything that you could possibly want from a book. Even if you're not a fantasy person, the fantasy is toned down enough that it would be digestible to anyone, and it reads almost like a bit of historical fiction fantasy. It doesn't take place on Earth, but the world is so ornately well defined that you understand very well, like, geography, where everything is, who everyone is, where they come from, nationality, religion, etc.
And kind of like what they were inspired by too.
And it's very apparent what they were inspired by, but it doesn't feel appropriative either.
Yeah.
It's
such a fine balance.
Well done.
So well executed.
So, yeah, political intrigue, perfect magic system. There's only one, like, clan of people that live in this place called the Priory of the Orange Tree, that have magic, and they're the only people on this world that have magic. There's also like a dragon riding tribe country from across the world, obviously very heavily influenced by Chinese and Japanese mythology, but doesn't feel like it's fully in line with one or the other. So again, no like appropriation whatsoever. It just feels very inspired by it. And then the Priory is clearly very inspired by like Moroccan or Arabic influences. It's like a desert vibe. The people have dark skin and curly hair. The words that they use, the names that they have, sound like they could be from like an Arabic nation or language. Yeah. But again, has absolutely nothing to do with Islam whatsoever, and doesn't feel appropriative of the culture. And in that culture, women are pedestaled and highlighted and revered, and they raise children together as like a community. It's absolute so opposite of a lot of the like very patriarchal cultures in the Middle East. So loved that book. Immaculate vibes. Beautiful from start to finish. Yeah. Every character is so well defined and complex. Yes. You understand who they are, what they want, what they don't want. Especially Queen Sabrin is just so well done. Yeah. Just learning about her past, the choices that she makes to preserve herself and her kingdom. There's a queer romance, like all of it.
Lots of representation.
It's so good. And there's multiple POVs. I loved every single one of them. They were all very distinctive and unique. You have Idaz, you have Niklaus.
He's so
oh my god, what an absolute clown that is.
It's so oh man. So silly, such a silly goose.
Meducci Tane, who is just like cold, fierce, badass. And I forget their names, but it's a pair of friends who come from Sabrin's lands and are on a quest. And it's just so good. And the kind of like plot is there's all of these warring countries, nations, but there's a bigger global threat that they kind of all need to decide, are they gonna come together and take down the global threat, or are they just going to let themselves be undone by the global threat, right? Or like be ignorant of it and pretend it's not happening and then have the world end because of it. Yes. So anyways, long story short, there's immaculate vibes. There's dragons, of course. It's a perfect book. 11 out of 10. Absolutely loved it. I have picked up the prequel, but I was reading it at a time where I didn't have a lot of time to read, and I got it out of the library, so I had to return it. So I ended up having to not finish it, but I have it on my Kindle now, and I will be reading it very soon, and I've heard it's even better than Priory, so I'm really excited to get into that.
And it's like 500 years in the past?
500 years in the past, and it's so cool because they do make references to that time in Priory. But it's like brand new characters that we like might not have heard of or have been like loosely referenced.
It's like history to them in Priory.
It's so cool.
Now we're getting the full story.
I love Samantha Shannon so much, and I'm also planning to read her other series, The Bone Season, but it's incomplete. So as I just said, I'm gonna wait until the rest of the books are done. It's on its own section of the TBR, yeah. But yeah, I absolutely love this book, and I recommend it to everyone and their mother. Pick up Priory of the Orange Tree. It is like 950 pages, but it's worth it.
Yeah, kind of insane to think about how she took 4 POVs and managed to thread them all together and conclude it within 900 pages. And you think about like Throne of Glass, which has an equally high number of POVs and intertwining plots, but that took 5,300 pages.
Yep.
Very different.
Yep. And yeah, and somehow like Priory feels longer than that.
Yeah.
Not in terms of just like length and time spent reading, but I think just because though every word and every chapter means so much more, like I think Throne of Glass, as fun as it is, there's a lot of filler and just like random stuff that or random conversations between characters that just like take up space on the page and don't actually move the plot forward all that much. Here, like everything matters and the prose is gorgeous, and I just loved it so much.
All right.
Number 3?
Mine is Song of Achilles, Madeline Miller. Another one with just like the prose is immaculate.
Another author I will read every word.
I just read Circe while I was on my trip. Song of Achilles, I think just we all know the story of Achilles and we know like why he's famous and like how he died, right? Like that is just part of what you learn when you learn about Greek mythology. And so to watch Madeline Miller craft like his personal life story between him and Patroclus and the way that like her prose feels, even during good moments, feels tragic.
Oh my God.
I don't even know how to describe the way it just like it's sorcery to be able to take words and make them sound sad when something happy is happening. Like that's just insane to me.
I think I know exactly what you're talking about, and it's really true. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that she's writing like in a from a retroactive lens. Like she's writing about things that happened in the past, knowing what's going to happen. And the reason why it hits you is because it's not a plot twist when Achilles dies. You know it's coming
exactly.
too. So you're reading this like gorgeous love story while knowing how it ends. And it even still hurts. even though you know from the get-go, I've known since the 7th grade, like how Achilles dies when we had to read like the Odyssey and you like read all these stories. It still made me cry. I'm not a crier. I sobbed. I absolutely sobbed at the end of that book.
I am not a crier when I read. I can literally list out the books that have made me cry. And this was one of them. And I think it's because there is a little bit of a plot twist at the end, or not a plot twist, but just like
a detail.
Yeah, a detail at the very end that like makes you reframe how you look at the entirety of what you've read so far. And it like happens between Patroclus and Achilles' mom, and like after the death and everything. And so you have that like one little piece that just kind of like fully shatters you.
Oh, it's just it's diabolical is what it is.
It's insane. And
I love that book, and I
cried in public reading it.
I know some people who read that in high school, like as assigned reading, and I love that.
It should be
absolutely be taught in English classes. That book is wonderful in so many ways. It's a perfect like queer reframing of a Greek myth. Mm-hmm. The prose is spectacular. Yeah. The storytelling is spectacular. It adds detail to a story that you probably never would have read otherwise. And like same with Circe too.
Yeah, I will say the quality of the prose like extremely, extremely moving. And I think with Circe it's even more interesting because this is what I remember talking to you about is like Circe's stuck on an island. Like she's not going out having adventures the way that Achilles and Patroclus were having adventures up until the Trojan War. Mm-hmm. Like there's really like quote unquote not all that much plot, Like she's stuck on this
She's just
island.
getting visitors.
Yeah, she's
for
getting
a long time.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of internal monologue and a lot of internal work and growth happening for her, but it never gets boring. It never gets boring.
I heard Madeline Miller,
she's writing another one.
She's writing a Persephone.
Thank God. This is the Persephone we need.
We love Persephones. We need Madeline Miller's Persephone.
Thank you.
But take your time, girly. I know she's been like sick. I think she has like long COVID. Which is horrible, and we wish her all the best and healing vibes.
And like whenever the book is out, we're ready.
Yeah, I will wait.
We're sat.
I will wait like Cersei style 100 years for that book. Yeah. I'm so excited, and I love Madeline Miller's writing.
And also, good. I just think there's something fun about reading what feels like the backstory to the characters that you are familiar with from more like academic assigned reading.
Yeah.
Everybody's read the Odyssey or the Iliad, and
it's the Wicked effect, you know, like how Wicked is the backstory of Elphaba. It's the same kind of thing.
So true.
Where you have a character from that's viewed in an extremely different light in a popularized work, and then you get to see them in a whole new light. I love stories and books like that. I think there's some that are done very well.
Right, exactly.
Love that. Moving on to our number 2. My number 2 is going to be Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. And this has become a little bit of a TikTok book, or it was kind of around when it came out. I as much as I absolutely adore this book and it deserves every ounce of praise and hype that it got, it's fascinating to me that this is the book that the Book Talk girlies decided to sink their teeth into, knowing what Book Talk has now become.
Interesting, yeah.
I think a lot of it, hate to say it, people judged the book by its cover and picked it up because the cover is gorgeous.
It's colorful and it's got
I don't
waves.
know, you can right? we have it in front of us. It's the famous tsunami painting, but like with rainbow and holographic writing all over it.
Slay.
Because the plot is about these two characters, Sam and Sadie, and they meet when they're children in the hospital. Sam has been in an accident and is being treated for very severe injuries to his legs, and Sadie is there because her sister had cancer, and they meet in the hospital, and Sam doesn't talk to anyone. He's like not necessarily mute, but he was in like a car accident. I think his parents died, and so the nurses are having trouble getting him out of his shell, but he'll talk to Sadie, and they play video games in the arcade in the hospital. Then flash forward, they both attend Harvard, and they decide that they want to design a video game together. And this book follows them and Sam's roommate Marks, as the three of them kind of like start a video game company with the advice of Sadie's weirdo boyfriend, who is a professor.
That's all sorts of messy.
Well, he's not involved in the starting of the company, but he advises them.
The fact that she's dating one of her professors.
There's a lot of red flags going on in this book.
Yikes.
Sadie's decision making is questionable at times, and that's what I love about these characters.
Complex.
This book, these characters are so real. This is one of the only other books besides A Little Life where these characters felt like genuinely real people, and I didn't know if I wanted to be friends with any of them, because all of them have such except for Marks. Marks is a perfect angel. Questionable morals, but it's just like such a relatable college setting. And then you watch them as they grow up and fight, and it's such a beautiful story about the creative process and tragedy and processing death. I won't spoil anything, but there is a very, very, very tragic plot twist that broke me. But yeah, it's just stunning and tells a story of lifelong friendship and humanity, and how you can try to make the best decisions for you, and sometimes they're not the best decisions for everyone else, and they turn out to be poor decisions down the line, and blah blah blah. But It's very realistic because we're humans and we're flawed and we can only do our best, and sometimes that means hurting other people. And this is a story about all of that and the beautiful process of friendship and creation as these people like work together on video games. And I love it. It's gorgeous, and I will probably read it again someday. I don't usually reread books, but this is one I would definitely come back to because I think about it all the time. It's so good.
Love that for you. That's going to go on another section of the TBR, books to reread.
Yeah. Oh my God. No, we can't be doing that.
We'll get to it eventually.
Yes.
In decades. Okay, my number 2. So Natalie's like, oh, tomorrow is not what book talk is typically focused on. My number 2 is what book talk is typically focused on. And that is, of course, A Court of Mist and Fury. And I will not apologize for it.
As you shouldn't.
I think about this book daily. Like, it's not even an exaggeration. Like, multiple times a day. Different scenes from this. It's just exquisite to me because
It's Claudia's Bible. She basically sleeps with it under her pillow.
No, it's so, like, actually pretty factually accurate. I am a sucker for a good romance plot. And the way that the romance progresses from, like, enemies to kind of reluctant colleagues to friends to lovers, and it, like, in, like, very, very subtle shades with, like, a really, really fun kind of courtship vibe where it's so good. And it's a slow burn when you think about it in those little moments, and then by the time it all culminates, I won't shut up about it. I have so many friends who are like reading Mist and Fury right now, and it is one of the biggest joys of my life that I get random phrases from this book just texted to me with no context, or pages or excerpts. And honestly, I have to do a lot of work to make sure I don't spoil it for my friends who are in different spots. But it is this particular one, it's, again, I think about it daily. And I have since I read it over a year ago, which I think is slightly unhinged.
Love that. And I love this book as well. And
yeah.
I am like the world's #1 hater. And I even had to admit that this one was a good time.
This one does it.
It was a good time. It was good fairy smut. I'm sorry to say.
It really was. And again, like, I will harp on this. Like, people are like, oh, it's fairy smut, whatever. There are like 2 smut scenes.
Yeah, and it doesn't happen until the very end of the book.
There's like a little like mini smut scene at the end, and then there's like chapter 55, which is the culmination. It's not, and I think that's what people misunderstand about like why we love the smut so much, or why we enjoyed it. It's because it took 54 chapters to get there.
Like, I'm not enjoying the smut because it's smut. And to say enjoy is also a loose term for me. When I'm reading a smut scene, I often have to stop and just like look away from the page for a moment and chuckle to myself because I cannot take it seriously for the life of me. I really have tried and I cannot. I can't do it. Reading those words makes me just like giggle. But I can definitely appreciate it for what it is, which is like the end cap, the cherry on top of a romance that's been building and completing over the course of the book.
Yeah. So it is just,
especially when it's hot people, it's fun.
Exactly. So anyway, yeah, it's just gonna sit there at number 2.
Such a fair choice. I really enjoyed that journey as well, and also Persephone retelling.
Thank you.
We love a Persephone retelling.
That trope, really, like, it just hits.
Yep, we love it. Okay, coveted #1 spot for me. That's going to be Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This book, I believe, won the 2022 Women's Prize for Fiction. It won something in 2022 when it came out. This is the best thing I have ever read. It is the best thing I have ever put into my eyeballs, without even a shadow of a doubt to me. Like, when I was writing down my list of top 5, I didn't even have to think about it. It just went right to the top. This is a gorgeous book. It has absolutely everything that I could, besides dragons, it has everything that I could want in a book. It is I am a little I don't know if this is like just a me thing, but there's something about a liminal space that really does it for me.
That sentence is so funny.
I just love.
I'm gonna get that printed on a shirt for you.
Just I heart liminal spaces.
Yeah.
No, but it's true. There's something about it, just feels so dreamlike to me, in a way that's like kind of like suspended animation. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. I love a liminal space, like an in-between place where you don't really know what it is, where it is, where you're in between of, like when you're really like transfixed in a liminal in-between space. There's something so like eerie, haunting, and captivating to me about it. It reminds me, and I wanted to, don't steal my idea, I'm not going to say more details, but there's this iPhone game called Monument Valley. Have you played it?
No, I haven't.
I have to show you after we're done recording.
Okay.
For those of you who know what Monument Valley is, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. Monument Valley is a iPhone game where you are like this little princess, and you basically are just like navigating through a puzzle, but the puzzle is getting from point A to point B in the most stunning optical illusion like palace ever.
Nice.
And each level is a different one, of course. And honestly, Monument Valley reminds me a lot of the game that they made in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, where it's just like you're this little thing and you have to get from point A to point B, and the graphics are stunning. But Monument Valley to me feels like what this book feels like, and I want to write a book like this so badly. It is about this man. He doesn't know his name, and he is the only person he thinks, except for one other guy, who is in where he is. It's this like labyrinth of pillars and vestibules, like think Greek ruins, but when they were fully the way that they were. There's no sunlight, but there's like soft gray light flowing in, so you have no fucking idea where this dude is. Neither does he, but he seems ambivalent to it. Like, he has a very cheerful, naive, endearing like way about him. Like, the tone, the way he speaks is very charming. There's almost no dialogue in this book, and it's from
that's so interesting.
Yeah, it's from because there's no one else in there.
Right.
It's from the first person, and you are kind of just like with this guy as he's going about his day and like trying to kind of figure out. He's not even, that's the funny part. Like, he's not even trying to figure out where he is or what's going on, because he doesn't know anything else.
Right.
This is his world. This is the world to him.
Yeah.
And it's like misty. There's tides of water that like will flood and come in from various places, and he can kind of like there's bell tones or something that help him figure out when the water's coming, where it's going to be. And he's kind of like mapped out the labyrinth in his head, and every day he just like wakes up and goes exploring, and he'll find like a bird carcass on the ground, and he goes fishing to feed himself. And there's this one other guy called the Other Man in this labyrinth, and he's only there like every once in a while, and they meet up at this one spot, and he'll like tell him stuff and bring him things. And it's kind of like a mystery, because as you go on, you're like, what is happening? Like, where are we? What is the point of this book? Because he's just kind of happy-go-lucky going about his life.
Yeah.
But there's something strange about the Other Man and about the tides, and like I forget what exactly happens, but something twists, and it makes him start to like investigate what's happening.
Ooh.
And it's you have no idea what's going on either. You're finding everything out. I could never have anticipated where this book was going.
Which is saying something, because Natalie's pretty good at that.
Yeah, so he's just calls himself Piranesi, and he's walking around in this gorgeously described labyrinth place that's like misty and mysterious and has tidal changes and whatever. And he's trying to figure out what's going on, and eventually everything is revealed, and it is wild. But this to me is like kind of magical realism, because the physics of what happens is not possible. in the real world. Obviously, it's like a labyrinth with like literally gigantic tides of ocean water, like swashing around in there. So that is fantastical, but there's no like magic per se. The ending is extremely unsettling. But like,
you've been warned.
Yeah, it's very unsettling, not in a like I'm gonna throw up kind of way, but in a like, ooh, I don't know how I feel about that kind of way. It's like it's not happy, it's not sad, but it's a little sad, but it's not like absolute gut-wrenching, devastating, I can't go on with my life sad like A Little Life was. And I keep making reference to A Little Life. That's gonna be for sure an honorable mention on this list because it is the saddest book ever written, I think. But yes, I genuinely can't say enough good things about Piranesi. This also has to go on the reread list. I would give a kidney to read this for the first time again. It is a transcendental reading experience, and I genuinely just can't say enough good things about it. If you haven't read it, I'm so jealous. Go get it right now. I mean, it is like you kind of have to be in the right headspace to really get into it and enjoy it, because it's not your traditional pick. It's definitely, I don't even want to say an acquired taste, because I think anyone could enjoy this, but you have to kind of be in the mood for
something transcendental,
a slow burn that you don't really know what to expect, and just kind of go into it without any more knowledge than what I just told you, because you'll find all of that information out like chapter 1.
Nice.
But it's so good. It's masterful. I loved it so much, and I love it so much, and that's my number 1.
Nice. My number 1 takes place in the real world. It's not transcendental whatsoever. My number 1 is Book Lovers by Emily Henry. I just think, as someone who reads a lot of romance novels and is here for the romance, it is technical romance novel perfection. Everything in that book, every plot point, every chapter, every scene, everything is relevant, ties up at the end, like has significance whether you know it at the time or not. The character development is insane. And what I think Emily Henry does really well with her characters across all her novels, this one just being my favorite is like the prime example. Her characters are so real. I think we talk about like men written by women as like their own category. Like, men written by Emily Henry are so great, but they're also flawed. And part of why it hurts me so bad to read her books in like the best way is because it feels like those kinds of people do exist. And it feels like they should be out there, right? So like single girlies like me be out here like, where is my Charlie? Where's my Charlie Lastra from Book Lovers? Where's my Gus from Beach Read? Like all of that, you know, like we're out here, like it feels like there very well could be people who are, you know, there could be men like this out in the world. Yeah. So it's almost like too much hope. It's a little too much hope, at least when you're reading like something extremely, extremely like rooted in contemporary romance where you can tell it's a man written by a woman. You're like, men aren't like this, but it's nice to read. This one, you're like, holy shit.
Like, he's out there somewhere.
He is out there somewhere, and like I need to find him. And it's just, yeah, her characters are exquisite and relatable, even if you don't necessarily like have their life experiences or all of that. It just feels so real. And her word choice and like the way that she gives you just enough without overwhelming you, and it's just so good. And it's funny because I had lent some Colleen Hoover novels to some friends, and then once people are like hooked on like the Colleen Hoover romance of it all, I'm like, okay, now you need to read Book Lovers. Some people just like are not here for it. They're not here for the prose that it's a little bit, you know, they want the like easy to read prose. They want the Colleen Hoover like very, very easy to consume romance. And Emily Henry has a little bit of a slower pace in most of her books, and the like emotional nuance is just, it's more nuanced. It's not quite as drastic as like a Colleen Hoover novel, especially, you know, when you think of It Ends With Us and It Starts With Us. Like there's a lot of emotion and there's a lot of really heavy topics in those. Emily Henry's like don't don't kind of have those wild mood swings. And so you really have to pay attention to the emotional nuance and the emotional development. And again, like similar to A Court of Mist and Fury, like it happens in shades, right? And it's so exquisitely done how it changes just like a little bit at a time. And then by the end, you have these characters that are like, wow, I'm kind of unrecognizable, but in like a realistic way.
Yeah.
And it's just so wonderful. Book Lovers is literally about a girl who's a literary agent and a guy who's an editor. And they end up like working together because she is representing an author whose books are being published by the publishing house he works for. And they both realized that they kind of hate their jobs. But they're working together with her author, and she's actually really quite good at the whole editing process. And eventually, like, he quits his job and recommends her as his replacement.
Oh, cool.
Because he's like, you would be a really good editor. Why are you still agenting? And that's like part of the plot is like they're learning how to work together even though they can't stand each other, and then eventually realizing, you know, like it's just it's so good. Makes me want to yell. I can't yell though because I lost my voice, as you can hear. So no yelling will be happening for a little while, but internally screaming.
Wow, that description even like makes me want to maybe pick up Book Lovers at some point.
As like, especially
I'm
for
not
you,
a romance
since
girly, but like I feel like that if it's realistic enough, see, like the fantasy romances I can get into because there's the fantasy for me to be into.
There's it's just not realistic. Like,
right,
that's not the point.
Right, but I think that sounds like something I could be into. Yeah,
most definitely. And I think like Beach Read and Happy Place, also by Emily Henry, kind of like right underneath there, like still very, very good. And then I hear a lot of people, like I read People We Meet on Vacation, one of her other books. That was like the first Emily Henry book I read. It's very slow. That one is very slow. So if you start with that one,
that's what I've heard.
I can see why people would read that and be like, I don't know if I'm going to read any more Emily Henry. Like that's the outlier. Forget about that one if you have preconceived notions based on that book.
Have you read her new one yet?
No, not yet. It's on my list. Cannot wait. Cannot read it fast.
I know. She has a really she seems to have a good fan club going where she's like the it girl of romance.
Yeah, and I think she's carved out this nice little niche for herself because it's not like she's not in this world of creating like real world stories with characters that could never ever exist.
Yeah.
Her stories are just so possible.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Should we do some honorable mentions?
Sure, let's riff.
So, I mean, I just have to talk about A Little Life for 1 second. Because the reason that A Little Life did not make it onto this list is because if we are picking top 5, like, favorite books in terms of these are books that have stuck with you, but in a way that, like, makes you think fondly back on the experience.
Oh, I can see where this is going.
Listen, A Little Life, I think about it once a week, maybe more. I have literal, not kidding, flashbacks as if I lived the things that happened in that book myself.
Oh my.
Like, this book, it is the most visceral reading experience I have ever had. Next to Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. But the reason why Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow takes like a fond spot on my top 5 and A Little Life is being withheld for an honorable mention is because while Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow doesn't necessarily have a happy ending, it felt like it wasn't like overt trauma porn. People call A Little Life trauma porn.
Oh, like because it's so extreme.
I heard that the concept for the book was, what if we write about a character who never gets better? And he truly
sounds accurate.
He never fucking gets better, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
But it wasn't an unpleasant entirely reading experience. It was absolutely emotionally exhausting and devastating to read.
Yeah. That's what I've heard.
Because it is about 4 men who are all friends from college, and you spend the first like 150 pages getting to know them, learning to love them, and then just they get barraged with the most horrific, awful things happening to them throughout the book. And especially the main character, Jude, has just like had the most fucking tragic life imaginable, to the point where I'm like, is it possible to endure the kind of trauma that Jude has? And like, probably it is, and we've just never heard anyone speak about it, because it's unspeakable things happen to him, and he never speaks about them to anyone, because they are genuinely unspeakable things that have happened to him. But I think about Jude all the time. Like, these 4 characters, I have so much love in my heart for them. But this book like broke me. Yeah. It's so devastatingly tragic. And for that reason, I can't in good conscience like recommend it per se, or put it on this list, because like, think of any trigger, it's in this book. I promise you that. Every imaginable like mental health issue, tragedy, all of it, it's all there. It happens. You think of a bad thing that can happen to someone, it happens to one of the characters in this book. Yeah. And yeah, I loved it in a way. I'll never say I hated it, because that's not true. I loved it. It just, but it hurt. It hurt too bad.
I have a friend who's like, I think he reads like a chapter a month. I'm like, dude, that's a long ass book. It's gonna take you a long. You're gonna be in pain for a long time.
It's over there, but it's like 600 pages.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's so beautifully done, but it is heartbreaking. And Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is heartbreaking, but at the same time, there is like an upswing, and there's a resolution to all of the sadness and trauma in a way at the end of that book that leaves it feeling a little more resolved. Whereas, you know, A Little Life, definitely there's like a period on the sentence of the book and the trauma and everything, but the entire way through is just painful.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll throw an honorable mention, another one that stuck with me for like a really long time, even for a reason that is just, it just like surprised me when I read it, is Rebecca. When I read that, it was assigned reading in the 10th grade. I don't know how they got away with that one either. It just like doesn't seem like something you'd get assigned in like 10th grade English. However, watching a story unfold about like a young naive girl falling in love with a man who is like kind of kind of mysterious and like has a lot of secrets, and shows up in a household in a role that she's like not really equipped for, filling the shoes of a woman that was adored, and then like kind of like the dark twist that it takes at the end with Mrs. Danvers. I ate that shit up. My God, when we played Jeopardy before the final for that class, and we had columns for each of the books, and our like teacher had all these questions written, I was slaying that column. I will say,
I'm sure
that book was insane. And I think it's just, as a young person, when you're like in deep in academic reading, deep high school, it's like nice to have a little moment of reprieve and to like get a book like that, where you can like be in something fictional that doesn't have to feel like every single word is like iambic pentameter and Shakespeare. And there's still so much close reading you can actually do in that book, and you know, kind of tearing apart the characters of, especially, his name Max, the main guy, I think. Max and Mrs. Danvers. I just remember the M and the D because I had different colored pens, and every time they did something that was significant to their character, I would write that initial next to that page, next to that passage, and dissecting their characters, his character, and then Mrs. Danvers, who's obviously like the head housemaid keeper lady who's just evil. It's really a study in like character development and how close of an eye, even in fiction, you got to keep on these characters, and like how important it is.
I love books. I love reading.
Books are cool.
It's crazy that like I read A Little Life year and a half ago maybe, and still to this day I get literal hallucinations of the hallucinations from when I read words printed on dead tree.
That's insane.
Like, hello? It's magical that we're able to do that. I will talk about that until the cows come home, but I digress.
And just kind of on the topic of loving books, which is everything in this podcast, and thinking about things from a long time ago that stick with you, blah, blah, blah. The new Hunger Games book was just announced. The new Hunger Games book and the movie. So we are being fed. We are being fed. Suzanne Collins said, my babies are grown up. They need more.
I do need, and listen, I think the girlies have been begging for a Hamish Abernathy book forever.
Oh my God, I'm so excited.
I'm so excited. I love my drunk uncle.
Like, I just think it is so satisfying to get some of these prequel stories.
Again,
it's so great.
Done over again. Like when we had Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and you get to see like
the villain origin story of President Snow. So good.
I'm excited to see what turned Hamish into an old drunk bastard.
Yeah.
Like
who still
sticks by his guns for sure.
Yeah, and still managed to be part of the rebellion when the time was right. But yeah, I like went back on the wiki and I was like rereading what we know about Hamish so far to like refresh my memory. Like, I cannot wait.
I think it's going to be wonderful. I trust Suzanne Collins with my life. So, yeah, can't wait for that. We're going to be waiting for a minute, but that's okay.
You know, well, we have Iron Flame, or not Iron Flame, but the Onyx Storm. Sorry, that comes out in January. This comes out in March, so a couple months later.
I think Red Rising 7 will come out. I don't think it will be the end of this year because I follow Pierce Brown on Instagram because I just need to like keep up with his ongoing shenanigans because he will like make announcements about his writing process sometimes. He is still very much writing the book. Yeah. So I don't think it will enter editing until later this year, and if that's the case, we probably won't get the book till mid to end of next year. That's okay because I still have to read the second set of books because I read the first 3 and then stopped, and will continue.
Yeah.
But again, another like generational kind of jump where we're introduced to a character who's a child in the first 3, and then it follows him in the second set of 4.
Love that.
That'll be and it's the last book, so I'm excited for the conclusion of that because I loved Red Rising 1 through 3. They're so good. I would also honorable mention those. So they're so good. I
mean, we've read a lot in the past like year and a half-ish since we really got back into this, and it was fun to like go back and look at the list of books I've read and be like, okay, which ones are my top, and then look at other ones like affectionately and be like, this was a fluffy romance, but it was a good time.
Yeah, some of mine were like, this was really bizarre, but I enjoy it nonetheless. Like, yeah. There's another book. I was just looking over there to see if I had anything else to add. There's a book called Earthlings that I read that was translated from Japanese, and it is the most bizarre and disturbing book I've ever read in my life. And I think about it a lot, but not in necessarily a good way. Like, it was disgusting.
Yikes.
And I can't say it was bad because it wasn't bad. I enjoyed reading it to a degree, but it also just like, I don't know if it's just like a Japanese fiction thing, but there's so much like incest talk in like I love reading Japanese fiction because a lot of it is very like quirky magical realism-y. What's his face, Murakami. His books a lot of times will have like a little incest moment, and I'm like, this is just for what?
Like, why?
There was like an Oedipus thing. It was bizarre. Anyways, I think about them a lot because there's some, and in that book there's also cannibalism. I was like, what is going on here? It's really strange. Yet made an impact on me. So, and it's not like I read it and I was like, oh, this book is actively not good. Like, it's well written, it's well
crafted, but what they're crafting
right.
is insane.
Right. So yeah. Yeah, it was interesting looking back for sure, and I'm very confident after looking through like my last few years worth of reading that my top 5 are my top 5.
Yeah, very confident. And look, if you want to chime in with your top 5,
or we would love to hear it.
We'd love to hear if you have any of ours in your top 5. If you hated any of ours from our top 5, let us know. Send us a DM on Instagram, email us, just find us at thedownlore on most platforms.
And thedownlore@gmail.com if you're old and you use email. That's all for
That's all
today,
we got.
folks.
Thanks for going through our top 5
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
on the airwaves.
Yeah, have a lovely whatever day, week, month, year.
Whenever you're listening to this, whatever
For sure.
location and time.
Have a good
Have
day,
a good whatever
night.
it is.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.